Do I need to introduce him? Does anyone know who Paul Kirtley is? Yeah? So, Paul, what you didn't know is they've been discussing all day what your entrance music is. You got it? Yeah, yeah. Like if you were wrestling, what song would you come into?
It's a good one. Something pretty heavy, I reckon. Yeah, something.
Justin Bieber, then.
Slayer.
Justin Bieber.
Slayer, I reckon. Yeah.
Slayer.
Yeah.
Well, we haven't got it, so do you want to sing it as he comes in? No? All right, guys. I'm going to get off the stage. Massive round of applause. Let's make some noise for the legend, Paul Kirtley.
Well, thank you for that. Much appreciated. I am actually recording this, so if you want to go back over it at some point, it will be on my website, as long as it all works, technology being what it is. Well, thank you very much for coming and giving me some of your attention. And I think Danny said to me, oh, you're kind of like headlining on Saturday. And I'm like, no, you just put me last because you know I ramble on, Danny, and there's nobody after me. So I'm not going to throw the schedule off. That's, I appreciated the compliment, but that's all it was. But, fair play to Danny and his team for putting this on in the shadow of COVID. It's been a tough year. And thank you all for being here, and I appreciate you, as I say, giving me some attention. Now, I always try and make a new presentation for each kind of big presentation that I do, and so this is not one I've given before. I've got no idea how long it's going to take. It might be dark by the time we've finished. I've no idea. If you need to go to the toilet and come back, that's fine. I won't be offended, but I'll try and stick to the vague timeline. And as Mark said, I will be doing a kind of book signing afterwards, and I am here tonight and tomorrow, so don't feel like you have to talk to me afterwards. We'll do the book signing, and then I'll be around and have a beer and have a chat and that type of thing. So title is Building Connections with Nature Through Wilderness Skills, and I'll move around so people can see that's the idea. And I wasn't quite sure what the audience was going to be here, so I thought I'd keep it fairly broad. There might be a few slightly controversial things in here. I might leave you with more questions than answers, and that's probably a good thing. I think there are certain things that maybe I want to address that are taken as a given that we can have a think about, and also particularly in the context of some of the people here at least being involved in scouting, being involved in bushcraft, being involved in traditional living skills and various other aspects of that. We've maybe got a slightly more physical connection with natural materials and nature than some outdoors people. And maybe there are some outdoors people here who are maybe new to all of this, that maybe they're new to axes and new to fires and all of those sorts of aspects that some of the rest of us are used to. And so let's try and think about how that all sticks together. And this is something I put into a presentation. It was in the middle of a presentation that I gave about 5 years ago. And so it was quite fresh then, but I think it's probably no surprise to many of you, and I'll read it out to you because I appreciate it's a bit further away for some of you. The balance of evidence indicates conclusively that knowing and experiencing nature makes us generally happier, healthier people. And that was from a paper that was put out in 2013. If you're going to get wet, guys and girls, please try and squeeze in if you want to. So there's a mounting set of evidence that suggests that interacting with nature is good for us, both in terms of physical health and in terms of mental health. And I think especially in the context of the last year that we've had, where some of us have not been involved in nature as much as we would have liked. We've been in lockdowns, we haven't been going out as much, we've been working from home, we haven't even been traveling to work. All of those things are maybe even more prevalent in our minds than normal. So we know that interaction with nature is important, and that's something that I've talked about before. It's something that other people have talked about before. But what I really wanted to talk about today, that part about knowing and experiencing nature that was in that previous phrase. What do we mean by knowing and experiencing? That means different things to different people. Okay, so let's explore that a little bit. First off, though, some of you maybe don't know who I am, so just to give you a bit of context, right? I've got a company called Frontier Bushcraft, which I started in 2010. Yeah, it's good. 2010. And that's my kind of vehicle for teaching in person, teaching online, etc. Okay? And this is the sort of thing that we do. We're teaching.
Man, I want the bunny.
Where's your bunny? It's behind you. It's all right. Bunnies can be problematic. So we're teaching campcraft skills, fire skills, woodcraft skills. But I'm also pretty passionate, those of you who know me well will know this, I'm passionate about teaching about plants and uses, not just foods, but medicines, practical uses. And, you know, the classic one here is one of the best bushcraft and survival plants you can know, which is cattail, Tifa latifolia. Very, very useful plant. It occurs right around certainly the northern hemisphere, and has many, many uses, from fire to making matting to food, lots and lots of uses. And I love teaching people about those things. It really enables them to engage in the resources that are available in nature. I'm also a qualified canoe instructor, qualified canoe leader, and as well as doing quite a few things in the UK, do a fair amount of overseas tripping in Canada in particular, and I love going into those wild environments and using the skill set along the way. Many years ago I did do the UKML award as well, and I do like being in the hills, and that was kind of where I really got into doing outdoor stuff on my own, really, was doing trips, backpacking trips and mountain trips. But really what my passion has been for a long time are the woodland skills, the forest skills, working with tools, working with axes and knives, and interacting with those natural materials. And indeed, Mark's sort of stolen my thunder, but I have just recently published a book, Wilderness Axe Skills and Campcraft, where you can, read more about that type of thing if you're interested. But I've got a question for you. I've got a number of questions for you, a bit of audience interaction. Do you recognise this gentleman? Yes. Some of you will, definitely. For those of you that do know, can you tell those that don't this gentleman's name? Robert Baden-Powell, yes, who was founder of the Scouting movement. Yep. And here's a quote from Baden-Powell about nature study and how it fitted into his philosophy. Nature study will show you how full of beautiful and wonderful things God has made the world for you to enjoy. Be contented with what you have got and make the best of it. Look on the bright side of things instead of the gloomy one. So he saw nature study as integral into being contented and seeing what great things were there. Maybe slightly more difficult question. Who's this gentleman, or who was this gentleman? Anyone know? He was quite old when this photograph was taken. He had a rough life. Outdoor life's tough, yeah? That's John Muir, yeah, who was a Scottish guy who emigrated to the States. You've heard of the John Muir Trust, you've heard of the John Muir Trail, heard of the Sierra Club. He was one of the founders of the Sierra Club, was integral in Yosemite becoming a national park in the States. And here is one of his quotes. Keep close to nature's heart and break clear away once in a while and climb a mountain or spend a week in the woods. Wash your spirit clean. So he was even more, wasn't just practical for him, it was pretty much spiritual for him in terms of his relationship. In a different way to Baden-Powell's faith, perhaps. Does anybody know who this person is or was? Not Grey Owl. Good guess.
Sitting Bull.
Again, good guess. Black Elk. No, this is Chief Seattle, and Seattle was an anglicisation of his First Nations name. He got on well with the white settlers, and he got on well with one of the founders of Seattle, who was also a proponent, or certainly of the time, he was a proponent of indigenous rights in North America, and he formed quite a strong bond. He's also been credited with some speeches and even a letter to the American president of the time that is probably fictitious, because he didn't speak English and he was also illiterate. But he was a great orator. He was known as being a great orator and did give speeches, but none of the transcriptions are thought to be particularly accurate. But one of the things that is attributed to him, to Chief Seattle, after whom the city of Seattle was named in his honor, all things share the same breath: the beast, the tree, the man. The air shares its spirit with all the life it supports. So that's a very First Nations way of thinking about how everything's integrated, how everything's equal. The kind of Western European Christian tradition tends to put man above all others, whereas a lot of the indigenous theologies, if you like, tend to put man and beast on more of a par. So there's a difference there in how the fundamental philosophy makes people think about their relationship with nature, and we're still seeing that play out, even though we are less of a religious society now than perhaps we ever were. Okay, what did all these people have in common? Anybody got any thoughts? And there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer to this. There's probably several right answers. They all spent a lot of time outdoors, absolutely. They knew the value of nature and what it did for them. Yes? They're all humans. Yeah, they're all men as well, which is actually, again, part of, I think, it's a function of the era that they came to prominence in. Yeah? They did all love animals. Yeah, they all loved nature. They loved being out. Yeah? Any other thoughts? This isn't a trick question. It's just interesting. One thing they do have in common that I've come across is that they are all variously attributed with that saying, or the origin of it, which is slightly different because, of course, we haven't had cameras for that long. Yeah, take nothing but pictures, leave nothing but footprints. Now, that photo of Chief Seattle is the only known photo of him, and that was towards the end of his life when he was about 80. But the saying that's attributed to him is, take nothing but memories, leave nothing but footprints. But then again, there's doubt about whether any of them actually said or wrote that, because it's not really there in any of the guys who wrote, Baden-Powell and John Muir. It's not in their writings, and nobody really knows what Chief Seattle said because there's no real accurate transcriptions. One place it's thought to have come from is actually cavers. The North American Caving Society, if you like. It's got a special name, speleological, I think. It's thought that it came from one of their chapters. They felt like they were doing more harm than good when they were doing their expeditions into North American caves, and they came up with this credo of take nothing but photographs, leave nothing but footprints. And of course, caves do have some quite spectacular and delicate structures: stalactites, stalagmites, all those sorts of things. Stalagmites, I can't actually say that word properly if I try. Yeah, this one is in Slovenia. It's not in North America, but this is one of the largest cave systems in Europe, and that's even got a walkway in it to limit the damage. And so clearly too many people going into these amazing natural places can start to degrade them, and that was something that is encapsulated. Wherever that saying came from, it certainly has been bandied around a lot. Hands up, who had heard that saying before? Take nothing but photographs, leave nothing but footprints. Yeah, it's a very popular one. It's on little memes, on social media, it's on cards, it's everywhere, right? But nobody really knows where it came from originally. There's lots of different claims to where it came from. So what's encapsulated in that is that it's okay to go tramping around. Yeah, you can leave footprints wherever you want. Like, do that. Just don't take anything other than photographs, but just put your feet down. Don't have any other interaction with nature. Would be a negative way of viewing that. Yeah, and you see it on signs like this one: walkers welcome, take only photographs, leave only footprints. So basically they're saying don't touch anything, don't have a fire, don't camp, don't do anything else, take some photos, walk around, stay on the footpaths probably, and that's it. And that's very constraining. And it's not like walking doesn't leave a trace. Yeah, that's a photograph from the Lake District. Here's some other signs. There's some other variations of it from around the world. Take nothing but photographs, leave nothing but footprints, keep nothing but memories. So they've kind of combined the two there. Leave nothing but footprints, take nothing but pictures, kill nothing but time. I quite like that variation. We could all probably do with killing a bit of time more occasionally, particularly when we're out in nature. Just chill out a bit. I like that one. But fundamentally, they're all saying, look but don't touch. That's what they're saying. That's the way I read it anyway. And it's not like footprints don't leave a trace. That's in the North Downs in the south of England, yeah, in chalky soil. Lots of people walking will degrade, but that's all right in that credo. You just can't do anything else. You can do that damage, but you can't do other things like cut a stick or have a campfire. That's basically what it's saying. As I said, some of this might be a little bit controversial for some people. Yeah, but I get it. In the context of places that have a heavy footfall and have lots of people going there, like the Appalachian Trail, you need measures in place that protect the environment, because so many people concentrating into such a narrow corridor of wild space would degrade it if they were allowed to use axes and have fires and do all manner of bush skills along that route. So you need to take your stove and you need to take your supplies with you, and you need to pretty much be in a bubble and only leave footprints and only take photographs. So it's appropriate in some places, but it's very constraining for those of us who like to have more interaction with nature than just looking at it. And look, I get it, as I say, one of the things I said at the beginning was I've done lots of mountain walking and backpacking, and I've done these trips where I've got everything in my own little capsule. I've got my tent, I've got my backpack, I've got my stove, I've got my fuel, I've got my food. And the only thing we really need to take from nature, not just photographs, but water and oxygen. Yeah. You can go to some wonderful places in these little self-contained trips. And to be fair, there's not a lot you could burn there or chop there or anything anyway. So you need to take those things with you. Yep. And you can have an adventure still. Yeah. River crossings in remote glens in Scotland. Can't you, Matt? Indeed. And there we are. It looks like Mongolia, but it's actually up near Ben Older. A few of the guys who work with me at Frontier, we get out and do our own thing from time to time. And that was a great trip, and it is of that nature where we're self-contained and we're not really interacting with the environment very much, other than leaving footprints and maybe a tent footprint as well. I guess it can extend to a tent footprint. But we did take water. You can't really get away with not taking water. Water weighs 1 kilogram per litre. So if you want to go out for a few days, it's hard to carry all the water you need. You've got to get it from the environment. So you have to have that interaction with nature. So you need to understand about water purification, or when it's appropriate to drink the water straight from the source. Also, we did have to leave something. Yeah. It's not one of ours, don't worry. Yeah. Yeah, that's from a bear. Not in Scotland either. Notice the number of berries. We had a very, very healthy lifestyle. No. So I can confirm that bears do poo in the woods, yeah, because that one we found in the woods. And that was up in northern Sweden on a different trip, but I had to throw that in there, yeah. So we had to leave more than footprints, yeah. And back to that sort of trip, it's wonderful, yeah. You get to go through these environments without really causing much damage, which is appropriate in some of these places. But that was what I had with me. The kit nerds are going to be like, oh, I'm going to get a screenshot of that. Flat lay. Oh. Yeah, so that's everything. And I'd point out there as well, there's a stove, there's titanium pots, etc. And there's petrochemical fuels that have been shipped halfway around the world. Yeah? So I might not be leaving much of a trace where I'm camping, but there's a trace somewhere else, right? Yeah? All that metal work, the stove, the pots, or the plastic in the kit that is there, that's come from somewhere. Yeah? It's out the ground and it's been processed. Yeah? So there is a footprint somewhere, it's just displaced elsewhere, right? So this is off a beach in North Wales. Leave only footprints. Yeah, and that's, you know, they wipe clean. It's like an Etch-a-Sketch, isn't it? If you do it below the high water mark, it wipes clean. So even the footprints disappear. But what they're really saying is don't leave your trash. And that is a problem, isn't it? And increasingly people leaving trash in places. And I think it's incumbent on all of us who go camping and staying out, even just going out for the day and having a picnic, take your stuff home with you, put it in the bin. Yeah, that's another version of displacing the impact, but we don't want to be leaving it lying around in the bush because a lot of stuff takes a long time to decay. Now that was on a canoe trip in Canada, and we stopped for lunch at the end of a portage trail that also happened to be a camping spot that was used quite regularly. And I think a bunch of kids had been in there because at the back of the campsite there were kind of like crisp packets and sweet pack candy wrappers and things stuffed in little nooks and crannies and trees. It's like, why they just didn't stuff them in their pockets or stuff them in a trash bag, I don't know. But that type of stuff takes a long time to break down. Who's ever found like a marathon wrapper from 1972 in the woods, right? They take, yes, yeah, before Snickers, yeah, BS, yeah. These things take a long time, or a tin of Tizer or something, you know, that's faded underneath the leaf litter. That stuff takes a long time to break down. So you need to take it somewhere. Nobody's disagreeing with that, okay? And this sort of thing is unsightly, like beer cans and coffee cans in fire scars. Now, in some parts of the world, you will find established fire sites because they want you to have the fire there because it's on rock, it's safe, it's not going to set fire to the forest. So if you find a fire site like that, you want to leave it, but you don't want to leave, you know, your Anheuser-Busch beer in there, beer cans or what have you. So that is something that's really, really important, that we take our trash with us. I don't think anybody's disagreeing. Nobody wants that interaction with nature. Yeah, I really like interacting with nature by leaving my trash in it. I don't think I ever heard anybody say that. Okay? Grass. You're all sat on the grass, stood on the grass, walking around on the grass. From a young age, we are told it's okay to walk on the green stuff, apart from those parks where they say don't go on the grass, but then people still do anyway. Yeah? But don't go on the grass, do go on the grass. And this is a lot of people's interaction with green spaces. 80% on average, it's slightly higher for some countries, slightly lower for some countries, but 80% of the population of first world nations live in urban and suburban environments. UK, US, Canada, Spain, it's high 70s, Italy, it's high 70s. Yeah, this is all World Bank data yet. So a lot of the first world who are wealthy live in towns, live in cities, and their primary interaction with green spaces, apart from them getting out camping at the weekends and whatnot, is in parks and public spaces like that. And then they go out to nature. Yeah, they put their hipster boots on and tuck their woolly socks in, and then they go off into nature and they walk on the green stuff because they've been encouraged since they were a kid to walk on the green stuff. They played on the fields at school, they ran around the park. It's fine to run around on the green stuff. Okay, but is it? Leave only footprints though, the credo says. So that's fine. We can walk around in the green stuff. We've been told that since we're a kid, and we can put our big feet in that, and that's fine because John Muir or Chief Seattle or somebody else said it was okay. Okay, this is Upper Teesdale, and I kind of find this ironic because they put a great big dam up there, Cow Green Reservoir, in the late 60s, early 70s, but there is some really rare alpine flora up there that you only find in some other places. It's kind of like subglacial alpine flora. And there are things like the bird's eye primrose, which is quite small, and you'll notice it when it's in flower, but otherwise you probably wouldn't. It's not that uncommon in some parts of Europe, but you'll notice that it's largely mountainous areas. So you've got the Pyrenees, you've got parts of the Alps, you've got parts of the more the colder Baltic parts of Scandinavia there and Estonia, and you've got some Central European parts there. Again, either cold or higher elevation, that's where it likes to be. And you can see there's only really a small area in the UK where it occurs. So in the UK, it's quite rare. Then you've got things like spring gentians, which people go specifically to Teesdale, Upper Teesdale, to photograph in the spring from about mid-May to early June. And I know this because when I was 10, I moved to Teesdale and I went to school in Teesdale. And so I've been aware for a long time of the quite unique nature of some of the flora in the upper part of that dale. And again, this is quite common on the continent, but it's quite rare in the UK. And the BSBI, they have a checklist of things that you can find in Upper Teesdale that is quite rare, and they're on that list of those two plants I showed you, and there are a bunch of others as well. and they grow in amongst all the other green stuff. So if you think it's okay to wander around the green stuff and it's okay to leave footprints, that's your only rule for interacting with nature, then you trample all over that stuff with impunity, even though it's quite rare. So we don't want to do that. So even those credos are not necessarily that correct in some of those places. And of course, even in upland areas, when you try and keep people to quite constrained paths, they want to walk around the boggy bits. I missed Tristan's talk this morning, but I know he's talked about smile paths and things like that in the past. And the trackers will appreciate the route choice elements of these things as well. But you see this with people; they tend to spread out in boggy areas and trash everything. All these nice little low-lying wet areas where a footpath goes across, they get trashed over a broad spot. So again, footprints can be problematic, and we're not the only one to leave footprints. Now I don't know if everyone can see that. Some of the people at the front might be able to see that. Does anybody know what that is? It's a UK animal. It looks a bit like a bear print at first, but it's smaller. Not quite. Yeah. Badger. Yeah. Badger, and you can see it's a badger because it's got five toes there, like that, and the thumb. And you can see the claws there as well. So if you start looking in these muddy places and elsewhere, you start seeing signs of badgers. We're not the only one who leave only footprints, or maybe they leave more, we'll see. So scratch marks on logs. The actual badger set, you might find that. And again, you'll find lots of footprints around. You'll find where they've pulled bedding out. They're quite clean animals. They put fresh bedding in, they pull it out, they put new fresh bedding in. They have a latrine, like we do. We go up to the toilet block to go to the toilet, right? They also have a spot where they go to the toilet, and they don't go in other places. And if you start noticing where you see the badger sign, eventually you might, if you hang around there, you might see a badger. This is quite a juvenile one, and he came literally running down the track towards me. And I had my long telephoto lens on for taking photos of the badger, and he got so close to me that the lens wouldn't focus on the badger, because I had this 400mm lens on, and I was taking that photo I was taking as he came running along the track, and I had to stand up because I thought he was going to go up my leg. They've got quite bad eyesight. Yeah, but if you hang out where you see the sign, you start to see other stuff, and that's a great interaction with nature to have. Yeah, you're not doing anything damaging really, as long as you don't disturb them in a bad way. You're going to see some fantastic things, and that's really nice. I mean, that photo I took maybe about 8 years ago, but I still remember it vividly. This juvenile badger coming running down the track towards me, and it was so playful. It was such a nice little creature. That's one of the latrines. They do a little scrape. They do their poos in there, away from where they live. And you might also find these sorts of things as well. I was just talking to bit of Pete's there, Pete Forrester. He was around before. We were literally talking about this before the talk, how badgers dig up wasp nests and bumblebees' nests. And you'll see that. That was a wasp nest in there. It had been dug out, and they eat the grubs in there, and their hairs are thick enough that they don't really get stung. And you'll see that sign. And you might even find badger hairs. So if you've ever seen an old badger hair shaving brush, and you get that white and black, you'll find exactly those things. So if you start seeing signs like a badger's had its head in a hole in the ground, or it's been digging out the grubs, you might find some badger hairs in there as well. Just watch out for any angry wasps that might still be around. Yeah? Deer as well. There's loads and loads and loads of deer all over the UK. Yeah? And you might be lucky enough to see deer. Yeah? This is a fallow deer down in Sussex. Photo I took a few years ago. That's harder to see, even on a really clear screen. There's a roe deer right in the middle of that picture, just there. Okay, you can just see its bum there, its white bum markings, and it's actually looking straight at me. Okay, that's in the northeast of England. But there's lots of roe and fallow. There's an increasing amount of muntjac around. There are reds in various parts of the country. And it's great, Chinese water deer in East Anglia, etc. And you will see deer. You will see tracks a lot more often, of course. And that's great. That's a great interaction with nature. You can go out looking for tracks. You don't have to follow them, but just spotting them when you're out for a walk. Where you leave muddy footprints, if the deer have been across that trail or along that trail, you might find those deer prints as well, and you'll see how they lay their feet on top of each other and all those sorts of things. Okay, you might even actually see a deer trail through the woods. That's quite early in the year. Those are bluebells coming up, but you can see where the deer are transiting through that sweet chestnut coppice quite regularly. They've got a defined trail. And you can see once you start looking that it's a deer trail and not a human trail. We tend to flatten stuff out a lot with our big flat feet. You'll also find hare when they're molting at different times of the year, going from winter coat to summer coat and vice versa. You'll find clumps of hare on the ground where they've been sitting. So there's lots of stuff you can interact with. It's not just the animals themselves, but you'll find all the sign, and that's fantastic. You might even spot where they've been nibbling. So like this beech, young beech here, the leaves are just coming out, and I actually watched a fallow buck browsing, which is why I then went across and took photos of it. But you will spot this sort of thing anyway, where deer have been browsing. And they have a hard palate and one set of teeth. And so they tend to rip things. So you'll see things that have kind of not been snipped, like scissors, that they're being pulled and ripped away. And it can be quite subtle. You'll also see slightly more macro features, like this is a browse line here. The deer have been browsing up to a certain level, and it's almost like a straight line. You see it with cows as well in farmers' fields, where they're kind of eating at the bottom of an adjacent forest or something. You'll also see where they've been scraping bark off trees, and they do it in a couple of different ways. They do it with their antlers sometimes, but also they'll do it in the winter, particularly with their teeth, and you can see the scratch marks up the bark from that. So again, that's a fairly innocuous interaction with nature, isn't it? Just looking at for all those nature signs, and tracking is an absolutely fantastic thing to get into. So I would encourage everyone here to learn a bit more about animal tracks and sign and being able to trail those animals if you want to. Now, this is one that might be a bit harder to track when it's in the water, certainly. Does anybody know what this is?
Otter.
It's similar to an otter, yeah. It's a bit bigger though, this one. A beaver, yes, it's a beaver, and this one's in Canada, and this was quite close to where we camped one time, and there were a couple of beavers swimming around in the side creek, and this is a photograph I took in Scotland. It's not exactly the same species of beaver that you get in Europe as North America, but they do a similar thing, which is they nibble the bottom of trees. Okay, so it's great to spot that. It's not difficult to spot, but also it starts to beg the question that I'm not allowed to cut a stick. Yeah, leave only footprints, take only photographs. But the beaver, he's allowed to nibble trees down. How's that fair? Yeah, how is that fair? Yeah, look how sharp. Imagine nibbling a I'll give you a challenge tonight after you've had a couple of those rums or something. Yeah, find out. I'm sure somebody will be up for that. Let's go. Got to volunteer. Yeah. See if you can nibble a tree down with your teeth. That's some serious dentures there that they've got going on. Yeah, but it's amazing to see. And one of the reasons they do it, yes, they build dams, and yes, they build lodges, but they also need food, and they like the greenery off the top. So they'll fell a whole big poplar tree to get at the greenery, and then they'll take it, and there's some birch there as well. Again, this is back to North America, but you can see there's logs there that they've nibbled, there's bits of greenery, and they take the greenery under the lodge to keep it for food in the winter. And it's amazing, once you start spending time in these places, whether it's close to home or further afield, you start seeing all of these things that go on. And that's a nice beaver lodge there, and that's quite a big one. And again, they'll put all the food underneath there, they'll have a little sill that they go up to keep warm and out of the water, and they can preen themselves and whatnot inside, and they can have their babies and all those sorts of things, and they're protected from predators in there, because wolves and bears and other predators will take a beaver if they can, and they're quite feisty. Imagine, they've got like those two chisel-like teeth. You wouldn't want to mess with one unless you really got hold of it properly. So but they do need to have a safe place to go, and so that's one of the reasons to build the lodge. They can stay. The water there freezes over winter, of course, so it's really interesting how they interact with their environment and what they do to survive there. And of course, once we start looking at nature more broadly, we start to notice all sorts of things. So this photograph I took in Northern Australia, and this is kind of straying into Tristan's territory a little bit, but I've got a lot of time for Tristan, and I think there's quite a lot of overlap between some of the things that we talk about at the margins. So you've got termite mounds there that are aligned with a certain cardinal direction because of their thermoregulation, so that they get less sun incident on them at the hottest part of the day and more sun incident on them when it's a cooler part of the day, so it helps keep the termite mound a constant temperature. But then, of course, because that's related to what the sun does, it's then also related to direction, because we know that the sun, broadly speaking, rises in... Just checking you're still listening. Rises in the east. Just not talking to myself here for ages. And another thing. No. So then you can start using that as a direction finder. And of course, we can look at where does the sun set, where does it rise, how does that vary over the course of the year depending on where I am in the world, what's the prevailing wind, how does that shape the trees, there's a prevailing westerly there, so what direction are we looking in? Yeah, south, good. Yeah, so you can see from the shape of the trees what direction you're looking in. Moon phases, yeah, where's the sun? Well, moon phase? Yeah. Is that your name? No. Okay, good. It is now. Moon phases, yeah, again, can tell you a lot about direction. And again, it will tell you about the cycles. Yeah, we have a month. The word comes from moon, right? Yeah. It's like these natural cycles, even though we've removed ourselves from them. As I say, 80% of the people live in towns and suburban environments now. It's intrinsically in there. Yeah, 365 days a year, 28 days in a month, 29 days in a month. A month, yeah, comes from the word moon. These natural cycles are built into our calendar, and we can use them when we're out and about. Okay, and you can't really see it there, but there's a Big Dipper, which is going to point you to Polaris. You've also got the Northern Lights, which tend to run, if they're in bands, they run east-west. So again, you've got two good direction indicators there that are going to give you a good handle on the fact that you're looking north. So there's lots and lots of things that we can do, and I'm quite passionate about that stuff. As I said at the beginning, I'm really passionate about plants. Okay, but I don't just like looking at them. Okay, so again, I'm breaking that rule. Take any photographs, leave any footprints. And I don't really want to stand on them, particularly not the bird's eye primroses and the gentians. But there's lots of other things I don't want to stand on. Okay, so there I'm picking some water mint, and it's just on the edge of a footpath. Again, it's a muddy footpath. Just here, there's a muddy footpath, and there's loads of boot prints there. And some of the water mint has been walked on. And you probably smelt mint when you've been out for a walk. You're walking around, can you smell mint? I can smell mint. And so, there's mint there. But you've put muddy boots all over it by that point. So you can't make tea out of it. But if you do spot mint before you put your feet on it, you can make a nice tea. And people often ask, how do you tell if it's mint and not something else that's going to poison me? Anybody know? Smells of mint, yes. But there are, yes, like there. So that's water mint, and that's growing on the edge of a stream. And that's a good one for you to know. It's quite common in the UK. There are other plants that look like it, but the mints, the ones in the genus Mentha, will smell of mint. So water mint is a good one to know. That's on the edge of Lake Windermere. Again, you'll get it near to water, streams, etc., etc. But I like to pick a bit of it, and I like to make a tea. So I'm breaking that rule of leaving only footprints. I'm not putting my feet in it, but I am picking it. Has anybody got mint in their garden at home? Yeah, boy. How do you want mint in your garden at home? Yeah. Gin, yes. Excellent. Good. If anybody has more mint in their garden than they want, though, it's quite difficult to get rid of. And that's why people often grow it in pots, like little earthenware pots and whatnot. It's quite hard to get rid of. Anyway, so there is a water mint article on my blog if you want to read more about water mint. But mint grows not just through seeds, but also rhizomal growth. So it spreads. So if you pick the tops off, you're not going to kill it, right? It will grow back again. So I don't think that interaction with nature is that bad. I don't want to put my feet in it, even though I'm allowed to put my feet wherever I like and leave footprints. I don't want to do that. I want to pick some and use it as a tea because it's good for your tummy, it's good for your digestion, it's good for your health, and it tastes nice. Does anybody know what that plant is? It's related to mint. Ground ivy, yes, ground ivy. Glaucoma heteracea, yeah. Alehoof is sometimes known, yeah. And it's got these nice kind of cordate, heart-shaped leaves. It has a square stem like the mints, but it tends to trail along the ground, and it's also quite aromatic. It doesn't smell of mint, though. It smells a bit funky. It smells a bit medicinal, perhaps. But it is a good medicine. It's good for bronchial complaints. It's good for sore throats. And you can mix it in with mint to make a slightly more flavoursome tea. Now, that's pretty common in the woods where I work, and it's pretty common in the woods in many places. But people, they're used to walking on the green stuff, right? They'll come into the woods, they're collecting firewood, they'll walk all over it. Because they just walk, it's just green. Yeah, it's just green stuff on the ground, and they've been spending their whole life walking on it. And we've been told it's okay to leave footprints. But as soon as I tell them, even on a day course, that this is an interesting medicinal herb and we can pick it and we can make a tea with it, etc., people start being careful of not standing on it. Especially if it's on a course where maybe they need to use it later in the week, then they're really careful about looking after the resources near to them. So the fact that I'm saying that this is a useful resource and you can pick it and use it means that they then don't trample on it. Similarly with this one, it looks a bit like nettle, but it's not nettle. Again, related to mint. Woundwort, yeah, it's hedge woundwort. Stachys sylvatica. Again, square stem, hairy, opposite leaves, alternately arranged. It's got a nice purple wine, sort of purple flower on it when it comes into flower, but a lot of people would mistake it for a stinging nettle otherwise. You crush it up and it smells like a smelly, mouldy old dishcloth. It smells quite funky. But it's a medicinal herb, woundwort. It's been used and it has anti-inflammatory, it's got antiseptic qualities, and it has wound healing properties if you crush it up and pack it onto a burn or a cut, and it has been used for that traditionally for a long time. So I don't want to just look at that plant. I want to be able to use it, and I want to be able to teach other people to use it when they need to. And I also want to teach people that it's a useful resource so that they don't go and put their feet on it, even though they've been told they can walk on green stuff and it's okay to leave footprints. Yeah. Trip back to Canada, jumping across, okay? Blood vein, river, 2-week trip, quite a tough trip sometimes depending on the conditions. There wasn't a lot of water that year, so actually it meant it was tougher in some respects because rather than lining the boats through that, we had to carry it over all of that. But then one day I fell in, hardly even went into the water because it wasn't that deep, but the bits that go down the side of the canoe have got screws in the top, and I took a chunk out of my thumb on one of the metal screws. And it's just in that really awkward spot where it just cracks, and I need to hold a canoe paddle, and it gets wet because I'm canoeing, right? And it just kept cracking and bleeding and then healing a bit and then cracking and bleeding, and it started to feel like it was getting a bit infected. Normally I'll just kind of wear that type of thing and go, yeah, whatever, it's a bit sore. But then I went for this tree, which is a balsam fir. Yeah, it's related to European silver fir, related to pines, etc. Single needle, looks like a little sucker cup attached to the twig. Really strong, fruity, medicinal smell. And it's got these blisters. You can see my finger by one there. Yeah, and if you pop that blister, you get this liquid sap come out of it, and that's a salve. And that's antiseptic, it's anti-inflammatory, it's good for sore throats as well. It's a bit acrid in the back of your throat. I'd mix it with some hot water. But you can put it straight onto a burn or a cut or something that's inflamed or infected, and that did the trick. Yeah, I've still got my thumb. You can see, there's the proof. It not only started to help the inflammation, it also promoted the healing and made it less prone to crack. So that was really useful. And that's me just, one of the days when I popped it on there, and I've still got my thumb. I've still got a scar there, but it really helps. So that little bit of knowledge of First Nations medicinal plants, things that I'd read, and learning to identify the common trees there in that terrain I was traveling through, meant that I could interact with nature in a very practical way as and when I needed it. So I didn't just want to take a photograph, I wanted to use it. I've written an article about that, balsam fir, and then the common question I get is, what else can you use that's over here that will do the same thing? So I wrote another article, European Alternatives to Balsam Fir for Medicinal Purposes. That's on my blog if you want to read it. But basically pretty much pines, spruces, firs will have some similar antiseptic qualities. Here we've got a common European, northern and alpine, maybe to an extent, distribution, berry, blueberry, related, vaccinium, the bilberry or the blaeberry. Yeah, great. Who's picked these? Or even just a few to nibble? Exactly. So you've broken that rule of leave only photographs. Take only photographs. Leave only footprints. Yeah, but it's part of our intrinsic nature, isn't it? Yeah. And it's great when you get a handful of really fresh bilberries. It's so good, and your tongue goes purple. It's fantastic. Fungi as well. You need to be careful with fungi, of course. You need to be careful with berries, but fungi in particular you need to be careful with. But there are some fantastic fungi, and if you get into your fungi, I know Danny is into his fungi, and there's lots of other people here into their fungi. There's some great stuff to be had, great flavours, great tastes, particularly when you're foraging. And of course there's practical uses of some fungi as well. You couldn't eat this, horse's hoof fungus, right? Fomus fomentarius. That's in northern Sweden on a dead birch. Yeah, but it's a great fire lighting material. That tramalea, slice it off, you can drop a spark into it, it will smoulder. You can take it into, you can use it as an ember extender. You can offer bodril ember if you want, or you can drop a spark into it. You can put it into a tinder bundle, blow it into flame. Fantastic stuff. Yeah. So again, we're breaking that rule of take only photographs, but it is what it is. Now, here's an interesting one. So I've got all these articles that I've written about fire lighting and whatnot over the years, and I decided that they're all buried on my blog somewhere, and I'm like, okay, I'll stick them together into a little free email course. And then I posted it on Facebook, and lots of people said nice things about it. Oh, that's great of you to do, thank you, good refresher, etc. But then this guy, and I've blocked his name out, with all the wildfires in the world, I think they not need to learn this. It doesn't even really read it. It's not even proper English, but... It's you. Now, I wasn't quite sure if he meant you don't need to learn how to light a fire because there'll be one there anyway. I don't think that's what he was saying. I think what he was saying was people cause all the wildfires, so don't teach people to light fires. And that to me seems completely backwards. You need to teach people about lighting fires responsibly so that they don't accidentally light wildfires. And you need to teach people how to manage fire properly so they don't have fires that are too big. If you want that, by the way, you can find it there. pkblogit/fire fundamentals. Now, I have been in the middle of a wildfire, and that is what leaf litter at the bottom of a forest looks like when it starts smouldering and it's not under control. And it follows the line of least resistance, smouldering around, smoke through the forest, and all that kind of hummus, if you like, not the chickpea stuff you put on pita bread, but the leaf litter stuff that's around on the floor. Yeah, pine needles, the birch leaves, etc., the dry mosses, yeah, all starts to smoulder like a wick. And then it comes to a dead standing tree, and then the tree starts to smoulder like a log on a fire. And then you get open flame in the forest. And these are all things that were going on a canoe trip. Now, there had been a fire going in that part of the world for most of July and August, and we were there in September, and it had been closed, that area. It was reopened, but one day, after a few days into the trip, we smelt smoke, and we were like, that's not good. Yeah? And the wind got up, and those of you who've blown tinder bundles into flame, what happens when you blow in it? Bursts into flame eventually, and that's what was happening to this forest. So there were still bits that were still smouldering, and the wind got up. It was quite sunny, and you know how you get that kind of thermal uplift, and the wind comes in the afternoon. It was blowing these smouldering bits into flames, and we had to get through this area, and that was, I don't know if you can see that, that's the opposite side of a lake that we had to stop on, and the whole other side is just white smoke, and it's acrid smoke that you get from spruces and pines. Again, you can't really quite see it on that screen, but that's open flame there going on just in that forest that we canoed past. And then we got to a point where down the end of this narrow strip lake, it was just thick smoke, and we're like, we can't see what's down there. After that, it's a meandering river. You couldn't get a float plane in there. We need to stop here and see what happens. And that night, we didn't get a lot of sleep because it was tinder dry lichen on the bank behind where we were camped. It was bog on two sides, lake on another side. There wasn't much connecting it to the rest of the forest, but there were bits of smouldering pine bark falling out of the sky from the other side of the lake. And then at night, it was kind of apocalyptic. Yeah, you'd suddenly get a whole tree just go up on the other side and burst it like a candle, you know, like bonfire night or something out of the, you know, Apocalypse Now or something. It was quite incredible. But luckily the wind direction changed slightly the next day. We're able to get past the end of it, and all was good. But we smelt smoke for a couple of days after that, until we got to a real marshy area and we left the fires behind. We travelled through a spot where there had been fires maybe at most 2 weeks before, maybe less. And one of the really interesting things, this is jack pine. The cones of jack pine, and they can stay dormant on the tree for 40 or 50 years. And when they're exposed to heat of above about 50 to 60 degrees Celsius, they will open and drop their seeds. So they're fire adapted. Yep. So one of the things that this allows them to do is to reseed areas that have been burned with understory fires. And you've all heard of rosebay willow herb or fireweed. Well, it lives up to its name, if I can get there. Because this is all fireweed, rosebay willow herb, coming up in the charred remains of the foliage that's there very, very soon after that fire had been in that area. So nature's amazing. Fire is part of that environment. Fires are normal. So this guy saying, oh, people like fires are starting all these wildfires. He's talking out of his bottom. Yeah. Most of these wildfires, and indeed that big fire that was 60,000 hectares at its biggest that summer in that part of Canada, they were caused by lightning strikes. You get thunderstorms in the summer, lightning strikes on dry trees, on dry, they go into flame, they set fire to other things. If it's dry enough in the understory, you get a forest fire. The fact that the plants and the trees are adapted to take advantage of the fire tells you how long they've been dealing with fire. It's natural part of that environment. Of course, we don't want to be starting those things on purpose or by accident. That's where the education comes in. But to say that fire is not part of that environment, it's entirely a human intervention, is total rubbish. I told him that as well, actually. And I'll send him a recording of this. And that's why you have your fire in a sensible spot. You've got a rocky outcrop. Yeah, it's really old rock. Yeah, the shield there, the Canadian shield, it's this pre-Cambrian rock. It's reckoned to be about 2 billion years old. Close to the surface in places. The topsoil's not very deep. That's where the fire spots are, and that's where you'd want to leave it so that someone else coming to that spot wouldn't have the fire somewhere else. And not just because you don't want them to have it in the vegetation or the leaf litter, but also that heat will crack the rock. So you don't want to damage the surface of the rock in more than one place. So there you don't do your let's leave no trace. You actually want someone to use the same spot. And what's interesting is when you travel in places where there were traditional trade routes, so voyageur routes, for example, or even predating the fur traders, the First Nations trade routes, there are particular spots, a little bit like where we found those crisp packets, that are at the bottom of rapids that are perhaps where they had to unload the boats, carry everything through, and they're kind of like, it's the end of the day, let's camp here. Yeah, everything's out the boat already, let's stop here. And in those places, you'll find all of these little depressions and pock marks where they've had scores and scores of fires over the decades. Yeah, and you can see that this was a well-used camping spot, and that's ingrained in the rock there. But again, they're not having the fires back in the forest. The bugs tend to be bad in the forest as well, but they're having them where they're not going to cause a forest fire. And equally, again, that was on a trip I did in Scotland. Okay. That was a side channel on the River Tay. There wasn't a huge amount of water in the Tay at that point. We were camping up in this lovely wood. It was like mixed woodland. There was alder, there was hazel, there was beech up there. But we had our fire down on this dried up channel because there is nothing there that's going to damage. Okay, there's a couple of rocks that are going to be scarred and cracked, but as soon as the water comes, as soon as the rain comes, it's going to wash anything left. And we burnt the fire down, so it was just ash anyway. So again, just be sensible with your fires, yeah? And of course, take notice of what the authorities are telling you. So you will see in various parts of the world things like this. This is one from Canada, forest fire hazard, and it tells you the risk. Now, in the UK, some joker would move that around, wouldn't they? They'd draw a smiley face on it. Yeah. It just wouldn't work here. You'd have to have it behind, lock and key. But there, it's just like some ranger comes along and pushes it, But the reason why we're not allowed to have fires a lot in many places is this kind of stuff. So this is the northeast of England, and this is firm evidence of the existence of Homo moronicus. Yeah. Yeah. If you don't get that joke, get your parents to explain it to you. Yeah. Yeah. It's a subspecies of human that does stupid stuff like this. Yeah. So there's a lovely little bench there. Yeah. Along a trail. Yeah. Above a river. Yeah. And somebody, and the old git in me would kind of blame that on kids. I don't know if it was kids. It might be old idiots. I don't know. But they've had a fire, and they've not only put the fire in amongst a bunch of trees, they've put loads of big logs on it, which they haven't then burnt off, and they've just kind of left it, in front of this lovely bench that some old granny walking a Scotty dog or something is going to have to sit there and look at. And down the bank below that, and this is why I think it might have been younger people, because of the choice of, alcoholic beverages that were in amongst their alcopops and that type of thing. There was a lot of trash that had just been thrown down the bank. Yeah. Again, that's not the interaction with nature we want, but that's why places get a bad name very quickly. That's why when you go, I'd like to come and camp on your land, please, can I have a fire? The landowner goes, no, because in his mind he's got that type of thing. So it's incumbent on all of us who are having fires and teaching other people about fires and encouraging that interaction with nature, which isn't just leave only footprints, take only photographs. I'm getting bored with saying that. You know what I'm saying. We need to teach people not to do this, and we need to encourage people that bushcraft people, woodcraft people, outdoors people aren't necessarily going to do that type of thing. And again, this is in Scotland, yeah. And I know people love this area. This is one of the last areas of like pristine Caledonian pine forest. And I don't know if you can see that black scar there. I think someone's tried to have a little fire there in the shelter just on the way up to the Larry Grew. If you know that part of the world, it's all burnt. This old Caledonian pine tree that's all wizened and trying to survive there in the wind. Someone's used it as a windbreak for a fire. Again, Homo moronicus alive and well in Scotland there as well. You don't need to do that type of thing. So again, you need to choose very carefully the type of interaction you have with nature, but fire is really innate. The reason why people want to go out and have fires is because it's the one thing in a lot of ways that separates us from other animals on the planet. As far as we know, we are the only animals that can at will create and control fire. Now, other species of plants as well as animals will take advantage of fire. We've seen that with fireweed and jack pine, and other animals will take advantage of it for hunting, for example. When there's been a bushfire gone through certain areas, it's good hunting for some animals because they can start to see their prey better. And indeed, it's thought that some of our ancestors might have had controlled burns so that they could go through an area of bushland where it was hard to see the game and they could more easily hone in on it. There's an interesting thesis in this book by Richard Wrangham, who's a professor at, I think he's at Harvard, if I remember rightly. He was originally a British guy, but I think he's naturalized American now. Catching Fire, How Cooking Made Us Human. And his thesis is that our ability to have fire not only allowed us to kind of come down out of the trees and live on the ground more, it also allowed us to spend less time chewing food. If you ever watched documentaries on gorillas and chimps, they tend to spend a lot of time chewing because they're eating all this fibrous plant food. And so to get any nutrients, they have to spend a lot of time chewing and eating. And he argued that our ability to cook foods meant that we didn't have to spend as much time chewing. And that's borne out, he says, with us having a less strong jaw than some of our primate cousins, and us also having a smaller gut, a smaller intestinal tract, which meant that large intestines and large guts take a lot of energy. So a lot of the energy that you're eating is then used to service that machinery, which means there's less for your brain. So his argument is that once we started cooking food, we didn't need guts to be as big because we didn't need to do as much digesting, and that left more energy for our brains to develop into being a bit bigger, which has caused all sorts of problems since, hasn't it? We do all these clever things like invent, internal combustion engines and aeroplanes and other things that pollute and destroy the world. But apparently it's progress. Different discussion. I did say I'd ramble on a bit, but we all like to have a fire. I think everyone can identify with this. Dark evening in the woods, it makes us feel safe. We're warm. There's very practical reasons why we want to be able to light fires, and it's again one of the reasons why we are not in Africa right now having this discussion. Yeah, we're not in a warm tropical place. We've got clothing, but we can also keep ourselves warm. We can have a fire, we can keep ourselves warm in our houses, but also back in the day, we could operate outside of areas where that thermo-equilibrium was entirely dependent upon our body and the environment. So fire goes back a long way, and there's evidence of humans and human ancestors controlling and using fire for many, many years. So it's integral. But again, it breaks that modern outdoor rule of footprints and photographs, right? So again, this is one from Patagonia. So it's world round, yeah? It gets Spanish, yeah? But you get the idea, yeah? Muy alto starts to get a bit dangerous, yeah? Extremo is not good, yeah? Okay, so again, take notice of what the authorities are saying. But having fires, you know, clearly they're putting those signs there because they know people are going to have fires, right? They're accepting the fact that people are going to have a fire when they're camping. But think about the risk. They're helping with the risk management. Okay, so there's me looking a bit younger. Next to a place where I've just finished cleaning up after a fire. Just there. I had a fire there not long before this. And that's the type of thing we want to be teaching people, so that, you know, we've had lots of fires in that area over the years. And that's that spot. And you can teach young people that, you can teach other people that. That's the way we should be being responsible. Because otherwise you get the other doctrine, which is that kind of slightly I'm trying not to be insulting here, that slightly forceful LNT person who gets on your comments and says, you shouldn't be having open fires, you should put a mound of sand, then you should put like a metal grill, and then like something else, and then clean it all up and take it away with you. But again, I'd go back to the stove argument. Where's the plastic coming from? Where's the metal coming from? Where's the sand coming from? Etc., etc. Why not just learn how to do it and not burn the forest down? Because that's what we've done for hundreds of thousands of years. We don't need plastic accessories and grill accessories. And know when it's not sensible. Teach people. Because again, urbanized environments aren't brought up doing this. This is why we've got this disconnect. Like if you grow up in a camp where you were learning this stuff from your parents, you just know. You don't want to burn the forest down where you get your food and your materials. If you have a fire, you're going to do it sensibly. But because kids don't learn that necessarily when they're young these days, then you get the Homo moronicus type of situation where kids want to go to the forest, or young people want to go to the forest, or young adults want to go to the forest and have a fire and be social and sit around and have that campfire, but they don't know what to do. So I would argue that you need to teach people that stuff. Don't say... I don't know if that's a round of applause or a trip. Anybody watch the Triffids show back in the 80s? That noise is worryingly reminiscent. But the only way you get people not to make a mess is to teach them how to do it properly, right? And that involves teaching them how to have that interaction with nature, not completely not touch it other than take a photograph. People like to learn fires. Who's that guy? Where's he gone? He's hiding. Good feather sticks, Mark. Where is he? Mark! Oh, he's gone. He didn't even know I was going to embarrass him. I only put that in. No, it's all right. Don't worry, Mark. I just wanted to embarrass you, mate, because you embarrassed me when I was walking over. But I already knew you were going to do that. Well, if it wasn't so long, the reason it's so long is because once I knew you were going to be here, I knew you were going to embarrass me, so I had to then put something in the presentation which made it longer, but that would embarrass you back.
That's perfect timing.
Anyway, everyone likes to learn fire skills, young or old, yeah, including this chap here. And there's a lot of nuance and skill in this. It isn't just about the fire, there's tool use, there's all that fire management, that's understanding of the fire triangle, all of those things. So it can be brought into education quite young. And having sensible sized fires that do the job, not big bonfires. Yeah, everyone wants to have a big fire until they have to clean up after it. Yeah, the best way to teach people not to have big fires is to get them to clean up after a big fire, and then they'll have a small fire next time. Okay, and I think one of the things that sets bushcraft and woodcraft apart from maybe other outdoor activities. Not that I like calling bushcraft an outdoor activity, because it goes kind of deeper than that into many more things. It's the use of cutting tools in the bush as opposed to in the workshop or in the shed or in the woodshed. Yeah, so a selection of tools that you might use, and particularly knives and saws and axes. And that's again something I'm very passionate about. But it's a relationship with the natural materials, which, according to that credo of footprints and photographs, isn't allowed. But it's again very much part of our intrinsic nature. We like to do things with our hands. We've got opposable thumbs. A lot of us like to be kinesthetic and have an appreciation of the materials and work them. Okay, here's, like, I had a cherry branch one day come off a tree. A whole trunk came off half a tree, and we tried to use as much of it as possible, because rather than just let it rot in the forest or turn it into firewood, we're like, well, we know how beautiful cherry wood is. Yeah, those rich tones that you get, and it's a nice wood to carve, and it's fairly durable. It's not as tough as some of the other fruit woods like apple, etc. But it's nice to make stuff out of natural materials, and it's nice to make nice things out of natural materials. Now, I could probably have bought some things that looked like that from IKEA, or maybe not as nice as the ones I made, but, you know, spatulas and spoons. I could buy wooden spatulas and spoons from IKEA, or, you know, any manner of hardware stores or whatnot. But how much would I value them compared to ones I'd made myself over a number of days, perhaps? You know, sitting around the camp working with an axe and a carving knife and a spoon knife or two. That's a really nice relationship with nature to have, but it breaks that modern credo that I started with. What about making cordage from bark? That involves taking a bark, maybe off a living tree, and processing it. But what if we take it from something we know is a renewable resource, like willow, that we can grow back again? If we manage that, then we're actually valuing that resource more than it just being a tree, and we're actually encouraging it to grow. And there's plenty of evidence that First Nations peoples around the world actually, before farming, did encourage certain things to grow, both for food as well as resources, and we can make very valuable things like string. Again, we take string for granted: paracord, nylon cordage, hemp, all of these things. But the ability to make string is a very valuable thing, and understanding which fibers you can use is very valuable. And a great, again, relationship with nature to have deepens your understanding and your value of those natural materials and those species that provide them, the lime trees, the willows, etc., even the humble nettle. You can really grow to appreciate the value of those things when they're just weeds to other people, that they strim. Yeah, to us, it's string. Yeah, and that's a big difference. But you only get that relationship by actually interacting in that practical way. If you want a list of other skills that might be worth learning, I've got a list on my site. That's been there for years, but I think it's still valid, and it's got links to various articles. Again, it's all free. You can get that at paulkirtley.co.uk skills list. I won't go on about more, but you get the idea. There's lots of things we can learn when we're interacting with those natural materials. I started off with a couple of quotes, 3 quotes in fact, and then we've used one as a thread through the talk about this how do we couch our knowledge and experience of nature. Some people would say we can only look at it and we can only walk amongst it, and maybe in only some places. I would argue that I think we're going to value nature and natural materials more if we can get a little bit more into it and a little bit more interactive with it, as long as we do it sensibly and with good judgment, and we don't trash things, and we learn from people with more experience than us. Who knows who this gentleman is? It's not Charlie Chaplin. Okay, that is Ernest Thompson Seton, and he was founder of the Woodcraft Indians, or that kind of Woodcraft movement in North America. And this is a quote from one of his writings: "Woodcraft is the first of all the sciences." And by woodcraft, he's really meaning what we would now call bushcraft. Yeah, but back in this time, which is 100 or so years ago, the Woodcraft movement, it was Ernest Thompson Seton, Bernard Mason, those guys writing those books. You know, Nessmuk kind of falls into that kind of realm as well. And Baden-Powell, when he wrote Scouting for Boys, also drew on some of this work. So it's kind of integral to a lot of the stuff we've been talking about. Woodcraft is the first of all the sciences. It was woodcraft that made man out of brutish material, and woodcraft in its highest form may save him from decay. And he wrote that 100 years ago, and I think it's more true now than it was when he wrote it. So that is the end of my talk, and that's also why I put that as the first thing in my Wilderness Act Skills book. I think that's really important, that importance of that type of interaction with nature, not just looking at it, not just admiring it from afar, but where it's appropriate, getting into it and working with it and appreciating it even more for that. So I hope that's inspired you to do some of those things, go away and think about those relationships, and I'll be signing books up there if you want to come and say hi. Thank you.
There we go, Mr. Kirtley. I think you're going to do that. Guys, that's just part one of Paul's talk. He'll be back in another 10 minutes.